Yo, welcome to Sig Slayers, the comic interview show, period. I'm Mike the Sig Slayer, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? This man is one of the co-founders of my favorite, the granddaddy of them all, man, San Diego Comic-Con, and his history with the Hedgehog is mine. Let him know who we got, man.
Joining us today, we have comic creator and animator Scott Shaw joining us. But before we chop it up with Scott, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right. Our next guest is one of the premier stewards of the comic book medium. He is a comic book historian, a co-founder of the biggest comic book convention in the U.S., San Diego Comic-Con. He is an Inkpot Award recipient. His work can be seen in comics like Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew, Sonic the Hedgehog, and animations like my favorite, Muppet Babies. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you cartoonist legend, Scott Shaw. How you doing, Scott?
Doing fine. How are you?
We're doing fantastic, man. We're glad to have you on. We're going to just dive right on in. Can't wait. So, Scott, we're going to start at the beginning. Since it's your first time on the show, we like to get your comic book origin story. In other words, how did you get your first gig in pro comics?
Well, I had been working in underground comics for quite a few years, from the early 70s on. And I would say my first, I was working in a comic shop in Studio City, California, here in LA.
Shout out to the 818. I'm from North Hollywood.
And it was only about 5 miles away from Hanna-Barbera. Hanna-Barbera had been, how many kids at 10 years old realize they have their favorite studios? It was Jay Ward and Hanna-Barbera. And so anyway, a lot of the people were coming in from H&B. And I wound up getting some jobs on the Marvel Hanna-Barbera stuff around 76. And I started out inking, and then I did penciling and some writing on them. And that led to me getting a phone call from Hanna-Barbera asking me if I wanted to work on the new Flintstones a TV show. So it was kind of like there weren't that many cards having to fall to get from one place to another. I was a very lucky guy.
Wow. Okay, so let's go back and talk a little bit about the underground comic scene. Explain that for the people that don't know. What were underground comics and what kind of content was out there? Just what could people get?
Underground comics were originally published in about 1967. It was hippie stuff, and I was in high school at the time and didn't know anything about it until I graduated high school in 68. And when I went to my college on Point Loma, San Diego, my friends and I went over to La Jolla, and there was a sandal shop. That shows hippies right there. And they had the first issue of Zap Comics and the first issue of Heads and Feds, which was done by the guy that created Wonder Warthog, who I was already a big fan of. His Wonder Warthog was in Help magazine and some humor car magazines and stuff. But he's one of my biggest influences anyway. So I immediately started picking up any underground stuff. In high school, I was as straight as could be. Within 3 months, I was doing all kinds of things to my brain. And I realized, this is what I really want to do. I always had wanted to be a cartoonist since I was probably 4 years old. It's in our DNA. And I'm so lucky to have achieved it. But anyway, this also works with Comic-Con too, because Ken Kruger was one of the con's 3 founders. And Ken had a comic shop, not a comic shop, but a bookstore that had some underground comics and other things, a lot of pornography in the back, because that's how you just had to deal with life, trying to keep your store going if it wasn't a chain, right? So we had a club, and John Pound, the guy that created the Garbage Pail Kids, was in San Diego too. And Ken was trying to encourage us, and he came up with the idea for an underground comic called Gory Stories Quarterly. And that's where John and I had our first printed, paid, professional comics work. And from that point on, I did a lot of underground stuff and still occasionally do. but it's not nearly. I never did stuff that was trying to freak you out. It was never too gross or too sexy. It was more juvenile because, my first character was called the Turd. It's not exactly, highfalutin. But anyway, it was fun to do, and I owned all the material, and in fact, I was friends with Jack Kirby, and he once told me that he really liked underground comics, so I brought him this pornographic drawing that I did of one of his pre-Hero Marvel monster covers, and he was horrified, and I said, "But Jack, you told me that you liked underground comics," thinking that he crude stuff. And there he goes, "No," he goes, "I like underground comics because the cartoonists own their property. They get paid fairly well. Crumb made a lot of money off of his comics, and you get to draw in your own style." So Jack fortunately forgave me for showing him essentially pornography. I mean, if some kid did that to me, I don't know, I'd probably get a cop to keep him away from him. But Jack was cool with everything. He never, unless you were intentionally mean or something to him, he understood that when you're a teenager, and I wasn't a teenager, I was like 21, but when you're that age, you don't have an internal editor. You just say whatever comes to you.
Okay, Scott, tell us a little more about how your work in comics transitioned into the world of animation. You talked about Hanna-Barbera trying to scalp you for some jobs, right?
Yeah, when I was working at the American Comic Book Company in Studio City, I was the manager, and I had my studio in one of the back rooms, in fact. Mark Evanier, who I'd been friends with for years, for half a century, really. He became the editor. He was writing the stories, but he was working for Chase Craig, who had been an editor at Western Publishing that did Dell and Gold Key comics. And he was retired after about 6 months, and Mark took over. So Mark was starting to get his contemporaries involved with it, and I was inking, and Dave Stevens did some inking on some of the stuff, and Will Mineo, and it was the first time I really worked over other people's stuff and got paid for it, and that led to more work, especially when they started doing a lot of comics for overseas, of Hanna-Barbera characters that weren't necessarily running now, but running in other countries. So then in that case, I wound up writing and drawing the stuff myself and inking some of it. And Mike Sikowski, the guy that drew all those early Justice League of America Silver Age stuff, he penciled a lot of stuff that I wrote and inked. Owen Fitzgerald, who did all the early Bob Hope comics, was another guy that occasionally would do the pencil art, and I'd write a story and then ink over it. It was fun because I was getting to learn a little bit of everything. And then after doing all the Hanna-Barbera comics, I got a call, and I was asked, I forget who it was, it might have been Iwo Takamoto's secretary, that we've seen your work and we like it, and we wonder if you'd like to work at the studio. Well, 2 years before that, I had interviewed there in 1967. It was probably 72. And they told me, they said, and I only brought my underground stuff to show them, and they said, well, we think you could do it, but we'd really like to see samples of you drawing our characters. And I never really thought about that, but it makes perfect sense. So suddenly I didn't have to show them anything. They were having to okay the stuff as it went through the office before it went to the printers, and apparently they were impressed. And I started out as a layout man. I was hired to work on the new Fred and Barney show, which was, the Flintstones were my favorite characters as a kid because I was right there for the first episode. I was already a Hanna-Barbera nut, and I also wanted to be if I wasn't a cartoonist, I wanted to be a paleontologist. So it's like hit every button at the same time. But I was hired for that because the finances, you couldn't start the show officially it had to wait for a certain date. So I was on there for about 3 weeks early. I worked for Doug Wildey on the Godzilla show. And Doug Wildey's the guy that created Johnny Quest and, was a terrific comic book artist too.
Really?
And of course, I just draw funny stuff. Even now, it's very hard for me to fake anything realistic. I have to kind of work from a photo and it still looks cartoony. But he came around my table. He goes, you're that Scott Shaw guy, right? And I'm like, yes, Mr. Wildey. Call me Doug. You don't draw people too well, do you? You're one of them Bigfoot artists, aren't you? Those cartoonists that draw big feet. It's like, yeah, I'm kind of like freaking out, trying not to look. And I said, I said, look, I'm not assigned to your show. This is just me kind of learning how to do things. And I said, what if you just gave me the scenes with monsters? I'm really good at drawing monsters. And he goes, yeah, you're right. You're okay on that. Just stick to the monsters. And he walked away.
All right.
But being at Barbera, I got to be a much better artist because I was surrounded by guys. I mean, I'd be working on Richie Rich, and these men are thinking this is like the crappiest thing I've ever worked on in my life. But I was just so happy to be there. And all the old timers kind of were amused that I was so delighted to be there because they're kind of thinking this is the worst place I've ever been. I mean, Hanna-Barbera was a nice place to work at, no two ways about that. But there were guys there that had worked on Snow White and the Tom and Jerry cartoons. So this was like way, way down their list of favorites. And yet they were so nice in trying to train me. And my so-called partner I was assigned to was a Disney legend, Floyd Norman. And Floyd became one of my best friends, but also a mentor because he not told me about how to deal with the animation business and how to do layouts, but I was going through a lawsuit with my ex-wife at the same time suing Filmation. He kind of told me how to deal with reality, things like that. It was a great thing. And then I stopped working there and then went to create Captain Carrot and worked for DC. But eventually I was back at Hanna-Barbera where I became a producer of the Ed Grimley Show.
Right.
And the thing that I never realized, people around me that were much more skilled and had a lot more time in the business were getting laid off when the shows were done and they were trying to come up with new ideas to pitch. They kept me around year round. And at the time, I'm young and cocky, and I'm thinking, well, I guess I'm really good. No, I wasn't really good at all. I was okay, but I now looking back, Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera were incredibly loyal even to their old timers, and I think they saw something in me and my enthusiasm about their older work. They were training me to become a producer eventually, and that's how it worked out.
Wow, that's fantastic. We're gonna bounce back and forth between comics and animation. This is great. But I gotta talk about the founding of San Diego Comic-Con, just because if it wasn't for Comic-Con, for me, I wouldn't even be into comics. It was the experience that I had. It opened the door for me to even be here in interviewing you now. And so I gotta know, like, what was your contribution? What was going on during that time?
Well, I mentioned Ken Kruger earlier. Ken was one of the founders, and he had a bookstore, and it kind of inspired all of us, giving us more comics to draw and encouraging. But many of my friends there were from my high school in San Diego, Crawford High. And one of them was John Pound, guy that created the Garbage Pail Kids. One of them was Greg Bear, the famous science fiction author, who won a lot of awards for his work. He passed a couple of years ago. Roger Friedman, who was my letterer for many years, but is actually a physicist professor and has written a number of textbooks. And Dave Clark, who had a job as a wine expert, but his hobby has always been writing poetry and doing H.P. Lovecraft style illustrations. So we were kind of the kids that wanted to be in the business in one way or another. The guys that Shel Dorf had met were in a whole different place in San Diego. Richard Alf was the third founder, and Shel Dorf was kind of an a-hole who showed up at a meeting and told us that he was the founder. And I said, I thought we were all the founders. And that's when he started hating my guts. But he wasn't the only person that he hated or hated him. But anyway, I talked. We had a club at Ken's bookshop at night, and we were all talking about it. And I was working at a B. Dalton bookstore in Fashion Valley in San Diego, and a guy came in, and he was looking for books. I believe they were the Prince Valiant comics, where they'd edited them and made them into children's books, but it was still the original artwork. And he was asking for them, and I said, well, I actually already bought them. And he told me that they had a comic club. So my friends and I and Ken Kruger started coming to the meetings, and they were already talking about Comic-Con. But quite honestly, I think that it would have never worked without having our group coming over, because first of all, Richard Alf had the money to start the show. He was a comic dealer dealing on by postal stuff. And so he had $2,000 for us to start in the crummiest hotel in downtown San Diego. Now it's the poshest, but at the time it was just a dump, and we were in the basement, so it was really dumpy. But Ken Kruger was the adult in the group. Shel was like a fanboy who could do some lettering, but never really got in the business. Kind of a professional fanboy. But Ken, having had bookstores, he knew how to avoid the police due to some of the stuff he was selling. He was the guy that never took credit for it, and neither he or Richard Alf ever considered themselves the founders. For many years, I was pitching. I said, look, Shel only had phone numbers and addresses. He had no way to know how to put this stuff together. And so the three of them were a good recipe. And the two groups of the people in Shel thing, they were all dealers and collectors. So we've got creative people on my side and the collectors and dealers on the other. Again, that makes for a good recipe of different points of view.
Right.
We had no women beginning. In fact, at the very first one-day tryout show, Jackie Estrada showed up, who was probably about 24 at the time, and became a Comic-Con after about 5 years. She joined the committee. But it was mostly moms standing around against the walls with their arms like this, and we found out they thought it was a scam for pedophiles. Why would there be a place to buy comic books in the, of course, probably the hotel?
That's a scam for pedophiles.
Yeah, I'm not kidding. But by the way, I'm looking around because I'm going to show you. I was involved with this book. But if you want to know the real history of Comic-Con, not the one that Jackie did where she kind of wrote all the history of it herself, this book has 50 different people that worked on the con and a couple of celebrities, so we'd have something to put on the cover. But none of us agree on anything, which is great. It's like Rashomon. But the thing that the Comic-Con has wiped out of history is that we were young people, around 20 to 25, I guess. So it was in 1970. What else are people doing there? They're smoking weed. They're having sex in the pool. I mean, they don't want to talk about it anymore, but it was like a party. And because I did the promotional stuff, I did the poster, I did the flyers, I did the stuff for the program book. I got to party the whole time and meet cartoonists and lose my mind. So it was. I'm still a hippie inside. I started my hair short because the cops kept stopping me.
Love it.
I got in trouble too because I'd say, I'm sorry, but my drugs are at home, which they didn't like.
So how long, staying on the Comic-Con for a second, how long did your involvement with the organization, and because it's clearly not organized the same way it was back in 1970?
Now it's a 55-year corporation, and can you trust a 55-year corporation?
No.
I was there for the first 6 years, and then I moved to LA.
Okay.
And I still had a presence there. I've only missed one of them, and that was the year I had a little problem with my leg. There you go.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was released from the hospital 2 days before the show, and I thought, well, I could probably use a wheelchair, and then I thought, not in the bathrooms.
So you've been going to every show besides one,
and I've never paid to go once because I'm a special guest every year. I'm very lucky that they had that for Sergio. I think the only other person that's there every year is Mark Evanier. But a lot of the people that did have those annual passes are no longer around.
Well, shifting gear back to animation, you won 4 Emmys for Muppet Babies. 4 Emmys?
Well, the show earned 4 Emmys, and I have a certificate for being one of the team in Muppet Babies. I not only wrote for Muppet Babies, I did mainly storyboards, and I also was the head of design the first year. So and after the first year, and we got Emmys, Jim Henson threw a party for us in Beverly Hills, and he and Frank Oz performed the adult Kermit and Piggy without anything in front of them, so we could see how they actually did it. And the other thing that for me was a trip was they invited Barbara Billingsley, who was Leave It to Beaver's mom.
Oh, wow. June Cleaver?
She was the voice of Nanny. And
I didn't know that.
And I grew up, was about the age of the guy that played Beaver, and frankly, it was very realistic in terms of the fact that the writers listened to what their kids were talking about. And that's kind of the thing that people your age wouldn't understand that, but I look back and it's like they talked about Mad Magazine. The dad had a subscription to Weird Tales magazine. I mean, they added a lot of stuff that's like, this isn't, looking back, this is not 1950s writing. This is something a lot really different.
Scott, I want to talk a little bit about the cohesion between comics and animation. For the people that don't know, can you tell us the difference between doing storyboards and doing comic layouts?
Certainly. Comic layouts, you have a panel that essentially is supposedly or hopefully the most important moment of something happening. And then you can move around from different angles and everything, and it's, you can be as creative as you want as long as it's readable. Doing storyboards, you not only have to figure out what the key element drawing would be, you have to find out, you get a script, and many times, the writers don't know a damn thing about how to do animation. I remember there were at Marvel, they were doing G.I. Joe and Transformers at the same time we were working on Muppet Babies. And my friends that were working on those shows acted like they were in a war somewhere, always had the scowl on their face, and we were all having fun on Muppet Babies. But I could see why they had scowls, because I remember one script on G.I. Joe took place with jet planes flying each other inside a circus tent. Now, how the hell do you pull that off? And they also hired a ton of comic book artists from the Philippines, guys that were, a lot of them were working for DC and Marvel. And they were brought over, and first of all, I've never met a group from a different country that were so nice people, very eager to learn, not trying to take advantage of anything, not nearly as shady as those Americans. And I was working for the union at night doing storyboard as a storyboard teacher, and a lot of them were there in my class, and they wouldn't ask questions. And finally, one of the guys that I knew fairly well, I kind of pulled aside and I said, "Am I doing okay? Am I confusing you?" And they said, "Well, back home, if you question a teacher, that's an insult." I said, "It's no insult for me. I've been hired to teach you how to do this, and if you need to know any." And suddenly everybody was asking me questions, and those guys, I would say 90% of them went on to do excellent storyboards. So it was the whole difference between picking a second and having something where logically you have to connect every scene to the scene before and after, unless you're cutting to a whole different setup. So the two look the same, but they're very different in terms of what they're supposed to put down, because the storyboard and the layouts essentially are the basis for what everybody has to work from.
Right.
The background people have to use it for the layouts. The boards, first of all, are timed, and since the 60s, a lot of stuff has been shipped overseas. So you have to prepare it in a way that's understandable by whatever culture is doing it.
Wow, that's fantastic. Okay, so you brought up some names in animation, and I didn't realize you were such a big fan of all the classic cartoons, the Tom and Jerry. I mean, everyone kind of grew up in it, but like, you're a fan because you brought up names and you worked with people. So with this question, I just want you to educate us a little bit more on someone in the animation world that the average person might not know about, but they should.
I would say that in my experience, the two guys that when I was a kid watching the cartoons, I'd see their names in the credits was Jerry just died recently. Jerry Eisenberg, who was the son of his dad, Harvey Eisenberg, who did layouts on a lot of those Tom and Jerry's in the 40s and drew Tom and Jerry comics for many, many years, as well as a lot of the early Hanna-Barbera stuff. Jerry was a great designer and a great storyboard guy, and he was one of the main storyboard guys on Muppet Babies too. In fact, we used to work together because we got assigned song sequences. And with a song sequence, it doesn't have to have logic. You want to follow the lyrics, but you also might to make it fun. And so we just sit in each other's offices throwing jokes at each other. I felt like I was back on Termite Terrace because I felt like now I'm actually a real cartoonist. They're letting us come up with the ideas, not some guy that's typing stuff out that makes no sense. The other guy is Willie Ito, who I believe is now 93 and still out there. And Willie also not only worked at Disney. He was one of the animators on that famous scene of Lady and the Tramp where they're having spaghetti together.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He went over just like Iwo Takamoto did from Disney to Hanna-Barbera. And Willie he used to also work for a magazine called Cartoons. And I loved his style, which looked a lot like Hanna-Barbera anyway, but better. And Willie did lots of designs on the characters from the early 60s on up. And then he went back to Disney, and he also worked on Beanie and Cecil at the same time. A lot of cartoonists back then, including myself, as long as you got your job done in the daytime, we were taking freelance stuff all the time.
Scott,
Especially animation, where you never know if you're going to get laid off or not.
Ah.
Scott, I want to talk to you about one of your creations. You developed and did several issues of the Captain Carrot series with the Marvel legend Roy Thomas. What was that collaboration process like?
Well, I had when I worked in that comic shop, Roy Thomas was one of the customers, and I'd met him at Comic-Con, but I don't think he'd ever remember me. But the more he came in, I was working for a magazine or a comic it wasn't an underground, they called it a level comic or something. I don't know. Anyway, it was all funny animal stuff they were trying to do after Howard the Duck became a big deal. So Roy Thomas was at the shop quite often, and he'd seen my work in a Quack comic, which was something that was kind of trying to be a rival to Howard the Duck, except a different publisher. And he was the editor of What If, the first version.
Right.
And he was always trying to fill it up because it was a thicker comic, maybe a 36-page of pages. I'm not sure. But for the 8th issue, he asked me if I wanted to do a backup story, an 8-page story. And I came up with the gag of, what if a radioactive human bit a spider? So the whole thing is my art as funny animals, except there's a panel by Dave Stevens, who was my neighbor in an apartment building in Van Nuys. And he also inked some other panels. But that led to, when Roy went over to DC, this was a very short time, maybe a year or two, where if you came up with a new product, you owned 20% of the characters. Roy and Jerry Conway split their half. I think Roy must have owed him something from some other deal similar to that. But I still own 10% of Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew. And originally we drew them and created them as, well, first of all, the pitch was, what if Jack Kirby drew Mighty Mouse? Because I can kind of do both. Jack and Gilbert Shelton, the guy behind Wonder Warthog, are my two biggest influences, run way on the other sides of the spectrum. But that's kind of why my work, I think, looks a little unique. But anyway, we did them as the Just a Lot of Animals initially, which was Justice League of America. We had Super Squirrel and Wonder Wabbit and all the main characters, Aqueduct. And I designed them all, and we took the pitch into DC, and they said that they wanted to have something that wasn't a spin-off of an existing character. They wanted brand new characters. And they supposedly hired me, with Roy's probably suggestion, that I do it because I worked in animation and they were wanting to do it as a TV show. Well, so I started redrawing all the characters as new characters, Captain Carrot, and all the characters were Roy and Mai's idea, but the only one that was my idea, and I came to Roy with, I said, in any superhero group, you got to have a big guy. And the Thing is by far my favorites. The Thing and Wonder Warthog are my favorite superheroes. Oh, and Popeye too. But anyway, I created Pig Iron. We added him. And then I found out from my friend Joe Staten, who's worked for DC and Marvel a lot, that they came to him and went around my back and asked him if he'd like to do the series.
Really?
Those wonderful people at DC. Anyway, we had dinner together about 20 years ago at a convention, and we were laughing about how both of us got to work on our favorite characters ever. With him, it was Dick Tracy. With me, it was the Flintstones. With Bobby London, it was Popeye. But he told me of this whole story, and he said, just because I can draw a Green Lantern chipmunk does not mean that I know how to do funny animal stuff. Scott's been doing it for a long time. He knows what. So they kind of, but I mean, you know how shady comic people are, and I'm surprised he didn't say, I'll take it right now. I mean, Besides, isn't that how you get jobs? You don't know if you can do it, and then you say, yes, I know how, and then you try to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Joe is incredibly honest, and I got to see him not too long ago at Heroes Con because we were still pals.
No,
But
we love Joe.
anyway, so then Roy and I got to it, and then the other thing was another slap from DC. I designed them so they could be animated. I didn't put a lot of detail on them because the more detail on is more, first of all, more lines that takes longer to do, and it also is harder to animate because you have to follow things around, and maybe it's something that really doesn't matter, like a bolt or something. Well, I had like 3 bolts on Captain Carrot's like costume. They gave all my characters to Joe Orlando, who was working at DC, and they didn't quite know what to do with him. He had worked for Mad. His ex-wife worked for Bill Gaines, and he was working on Mad, and I think his ex-wife asked Bill Gaines if he could put him at DC so that way he wouldn't have to see she didn't have to see her ex-husband. And I mean, that's what I heard. So anyway, here's a guy that's never done funny animals trying to tell me how to do, I never worked in animation, telling me how they should look. And so they added tons of detail. And then when I started working on it, I was told, can you please make it look more like George Perez? And I'm like, no. Well, we want to see a lot more detail. Again, it's like, this is not what I was asked for. But anyway, I went ahead with it, and I wrote more issues than I drew, and I inked more issues. But the problem was, they kept saying, well, you're late on everything. That's because you're asking me to draw things that I don't draw normally. And I'm adding needless detail just because you're telling me you want it to look like George Perez. And they kept saying, holding a carrot in front of me, yeah, well, if you can get, and you're paying me terribly. So I have to take on other freelance stuff just to pay my rent. And they said, well, if you can just bring it in on deadline, that way we'll pay you more. And it was like, I could never get up to the point. And frankly, I was still kind of pissed that they expected that of me because that wasn't what I do. And that certainly wouldn't have worked in animation. However, it is surprising that for 2 years in a row, Ruby Spears did a license Captain Carrot.
Really?
And because I owned a percentage of it, I was shocked. I got $2,500 both years for not doing a thing. And by the way, 3 years ago, Todd McFarlane did a action figure of Captain Carrot. It looked nothing like my Captain Carrot. It looked like a werewolf to me. But DC kept messing with me, but I finally got a nice guy at DC that was helping me out. I finally got it. It was over $2,000. So it was worth fighting for because I was expecting dinner money or something.
Yeah. Scott, I want to talk to you about your role as a historian. You know a lot about the comic medium in general. Can you tell us who are some of your influences? You already named Jack Kirby. Tell us who else has influenced you in comics.
Well, like I said, Gilbert Shelton, who also created the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. But what I'm really known for as a historian, I do a thing on 13th Dimension. And I also do it on Facebook. And I'm going to be doing I do this as a presentation at Comic-Con every year, and I've done it at a lot of other conventions. I do a thing called Oddball Comics. And these are the comics that nobody has ever seen, or at least not seen through the eyes of a cartoonist. And I only talk about the covers because that's the sales tool. And I worked in advertising for many years doing the Flintstones Pebble cereal commercials. Talk about that if you want to.
Did you do the Christmas one?
I did the last one, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway,
You said the Oddball Comics and the presentations?
Well, yeah, I've been doing this Oddball Comics show since 1978 at Comic-Con, and I have it for. I just kind of riff when I'm looking at the stuff. I come up with ideas. Sometimes other people make jokes, but it's essentially, you probably have this in your collection, but you never noticed this, and a lot of it is because cartoonists, especially when it was all back in New York, they hated their editors, and their editors hated them. At least most of the case, they did not. Most of those guys did not have friendly relationships, and they wanted to see if they could get if the editor was reading through it after lunch, chances were they were drunk, so they might not notice things. A lot of the old timers had told me that, including Mike Sikowski. And so you see stuff. The most famous one is a Charlton comic that Pat Boyette drew, and it's a spaceship right in the middle of the thing. It's a science fiction comic, and the spaceship and I guess they're propeller jets or something, look exactly like a penis and testicles, right in the middle. And it's like, I bought it, I had it for years. Suddenly I see it and I'm like, holy crap. So it's not just dirty stuff, though. There's just stuff that is lame or weird or something you never thought would be in a comic with the seal up in the corner. And I've been doing this now, like I said, since 1978, and I still find new stuff. And it's all from my collection because I've been picking the stuff up at Comic Cons for so long, I barely buy anything new or old now. I don't need to. I've got a storage space that's got over 200,000 comics.
Jeez.
Jesus, right. You should hear how much I pay for storage fees.
So you're researching stuff from this underground era, finding things that people forgot about.
No, this isn't the underground stuff. This is stuff on the rack at the market. This is mainstream stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a Supergirl comic. No, actually, it's Adventure Comics number 420. I'll give you a photo of that. It's Supergirl, and she's throwing a cannon at the camera, essentially. And it's nothing but a dick and balls. and to prove it, the guy that drew it did all the Bob Hope and Jerry Lewis comics later. Bob Oxner, he was a guest at Comic-Con, the only one he ever went to. And I had a copy. I knew he was going to be there, and I don't get people to sign it much, but I thought, this is an excuse to talk to the guy if I get to sign it. And the poor guy was probably my age, and he sees me walking toward him with the comic in his hand, and he starts going, "That was Joe Orlando's idea. Don't blame me." So I'm not imagining this stuff. And there's Joe Orlando again. Well, I looked this up, and Joe Orlando, he told me the whole story, but it's true. Around 1972, there was a book that, and it got a lot of attention, that in advertising, they would have sexual innuendos hidden that would make you more interested in watching the ad again. He had either read that book or saw ads for articles by him, because the artist I was talking to said he walks around, he struts around the office yelling, "Sex sells, sex sells." And there's a run of Lois Lane comics where it's like issue after issue, they're pointing at her crotch. I mean, the composition is making your eyes go to the crotch, but sometimes, one of them, there's a guy in a spaceship pointing up her crotch. So it's like, as a cartoonist, you notice things that most people just don't, and especially because I've focused on this stuff and blown it up so big on the wall, it's like you notice stuff real easily. The thing was, I did a Lois Lane comic where, not one of his earlier, but where Superman is chained to a kind of a bed with kryptonite clasps on him, and no wait, he's and watching Lois flog a dummy of Superman with a whip.
What?
And, yeah.
And this is like Silver Age stuff?
S&M, yeah. And when I showed it at Comic Fest in 2012, I remember this because it was so crazy. Everybody's laughing, and all of a sudden it kind of gets quiet. The guy in the background goes, "That's now how you hold a whip of 9 tails." Everything really quiet, and then everything exploded because like, uh-oh, there's a real freak in here, not just weirdos like us.
Right. Scott, you were heavily involved with the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise as well, from the comic to the animated series. Well, how'd you get involved in that? Because, you know, Sonic was a big hit with the video game with Sega, and then, you know, boom, we got comics and TV.
It was very interesting. I really wasn't looking at stuff like that. I was too busy working. And my friend Paul Castiglia, who was working at Archie, I'd never worked for them before, called me and asked me if I do this. And I said, well, I don't know. Can you show me what he looks like? And I looked at him and I said, he reminds me of Felix the Cat. And I really like Felix the Cat. Well, I didn't realize it, but he intentionally was designed to look half like Felix the Cat and half like Mickey Mouse, because they were the first 2 stars of animation. So whoever the man was that created Sonic had a goal to kind of give you know, those old characters some sort of, you know, salute in a way.
Right.
But anyway, I did it, and I did the first issue 0, 1, 2, and I only had time to do the cover on 3 because that was when I was working at the ad agency. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I was really busy and I just couldn't do the rest of it. Unfortunately, Archie has reprinted my stuff time and time again without me getting a cent. I didn't write the work for hire thing on the back of the check. My pages are in video games. They are some of the earlier video games. But a friend of mine, Ken Penders, taught me how to go through the Library of Congress and get all my work back. It had to pass Archie's okay, and they never responded, so I got it. And last week, Ken Penders sent off a 180-page hardback book of all of my Sonic stuff, including commissions and other things.
Oh, wow.
So even though I was never happy about how I was treated by Archie, Archie's not involved anymore. We don't even mention Archie except in my angry introduction.
Now, what about the animation show?
I only did a couple of storyboards on it. But I worked on the one that was called The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, because Milton Knight did the designs, and he's a friend of mine, and he made it much more cartoony. I really hated drawing the characters from the ABC Sonic because, first of all, it was very obviously a ripoff of Star Wars. Those androids looked just like stormtroopers except as robots. And their version of Robotnik, he was so fat you couldn't do anything with him except wave his arms around. He you know, the design itself was so ugly I hated drawing it. While Milton's version looks like he belongs in Sonic's world. He's flexible. He's simply drawn like Sonic is.
Scott, we have one last question for you. Is there something that we haven't talked about you want the fans to know about? Any upcoming projects? Any projects that you released? Any upcoming appearances?
Sure. I don't think I'm going to be at any more shows this year, although I've been to quite a few of them earlier. I will be at a show on the last day in January and the first day in February down near Anaheim. I forget the name of the show. I'll be at Comic Con, I'll be at Comic Fest, and I'll be at HeroCon again this year too.
Okay.
We'll see you in Heroes.
And then I also have, this isn't brand new, this is a couple of years old, but I'm still selling these. They're available on Amazon, but if you want to buy one from me, I'll do a drawing in it. This is a book that has tons of stuff that I've worked on, underground stuff, fan stuff, promotional stuff for Comic-Con. They never had me sign any things there either. As you can see, it's over 300 pages of stuff.
Wow.
And this is a $30 book. And this is something I recently done. I'm the only person that has this. This is something I did. It's called the Kilgore Home Nursing. Well, when I lost my foot, I got lots of crazy stories from nurses about weird patients, what it's like to have a job where you're walking into somebody's home that you don't know if it's infested with cockroaches or some sort of weird cult. Or so I boiled all these down, and it's this was originally online, but the whole thing is, well, those are development art, but yeah, everything's colored nicely, and each page was done kind of a separate step in one day of a nurse's life, and it's mainly based on the nurse that was the funniest nurse I've ever had. And I told her, I said, you should be a cartoonist, not me. She had a good idea. And I'm also doing a thing for this tabloid called A Kid and a Comic. I've never seen these in comic stores, but apparently the producer told me that a lot of kids hospitals buy them. And I have a new character that I pitched years ago as a children's graphic novel, but I still wanted to do it, so let me see if I can show it here. This is the first episode. This is called Pack Rat and the Scroungers. And it's essentially me as a rat, and I'm the curator of a museum that's all about pop culture, and it comes out, I think, 8 times a year, but within a couple of years I'll be done with the story. It's a time travel story that somebody's using a time machine to pick up rare items from the past, and so they have to have a race back in time, and lots of parodies about things that people collect. And the whole message is, don't collect things because you think they're going to be worth something. Buy it just because you like it.
I got a bonus question, Scott. Just seeing some of the work you're just promoting right now. You've been in the game for a minute. Has how you produce your work as far as comics, has it changed recently, in the advent of digital equipment and all of that stuff?
No, I still work all with my hands. Oh, another thing that I'm working on right now, Eric Larson's little Savage Dragon. Yeah. I did a backup story for him a few years ago with remember little Archie? Who seemed to really be connected to the other Archie at all. He had adventures in outer space and stuff. But I love that comic. So I did the thing called Little Dragon. And people liked it so much, I'm doing a full comic for Image of Little Dragon. And I'm introducing a new team of superheroes. And the head of the team is Captain Ferret.
I love it, Scott, man. This has been fantastic, man. I want to thank you for joining us, and just know you always have a home here on the Sig Slayers station, and we'll see you. We'll see you in San Diego and in Heroes.
Yep. Great. That's wonderful.
Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Sig Slayers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Scott Shaw. We are out. Peace. Sig Slayers.